Ladies and gentlemen, narcissism, as commonly understood, is often reduced to superficial traits: arrogance, self-importance, vanity. But this surface-level interpretation misses the deeper, more dangerous psychological mechanics at play. To truly understand how to respond to a narcissist, and more specifically, how to make them feel the weight of the pain they've inflicted, we must begin by grasping the architecture of narcissism itself. It's not merely a personality flaw. It is a defense mechanism rooted in profound psychological injury and fragmentation. At its core, narcissism is a maladaptive coping structure. It is constructed as a shield against inner chaos, a deep, gnawing sense of inadequacy, shame, or unworthiness that the narcissist has never been able to fully face or process. Rather than confronting this inner turmoil, the narcissist builds an elaborate, inflated false self, a mask designed to command admiration, control others, and escape vulnerability. This mask becomes their fortress, and the real damaged self is buried so deeply beneath it that even they begin to lose touch with its presence. The tragedy and danger of narcissism is that it's self-reinforcing. The more the narcissist relies on external validation to stabilize their identity, the more fragile and hollow they become internally. They require others not as companions, but as mirrors. Mirrors that reflect back their grandiosity, superiority, and control. And when these mirrors refuse to reflect the narrative the narcissist wants to see, the narcissist lashes out, not because of external injustice, but because their entire sense of self is under threat. This is why narcissists cause so much pain. They do not engage in relationships, they engage in transactions. They love, conditionally, manipulate habitually, and violate boundaries regularly, all to maintain the illusion that they are in control and above others. They cannot tolerate being seen as flawed, wrong, or insignificant. To them, vulnerability is weakness. Accountability is humiliation. And empathy, real empathy, is often completely foreign to them, not because they can't mimic it, because it destabilizes the very framework they've built their identity on. Understanding this is not about excusing the pain they cause. It's about realizing that the pain they inflict is not about you, it's about them. They hurt others because their entire psychological survival depends on dominating their environment and suppressing any perceived threat to their fragile ego. When you expressed your needs, they saw it as criticism. When you asked for respect, they heard accusation. When you pulled away, they interpreted abandonment. Everything is filtered through a self-centric lens that turns every relationship into a battlefield. But here lies the key: narcissism is a prison. The narcissist lives in constant fear of being exposed not just to others, but to themselves. Every day is an act of concealment. Every interaction is an audition. And behind the performance is an ever-present dread that the truth of who they are, fragile, insecure, unlovable, might be seen. This is why they rage when confronted, why they deflect when criticized, why they gaslight when questioned. The truth to a narcissist is not just uncomfortable, it's annihilating. So if you're asking how to make a narcissist feel the pain they put you through, the starting point is psychological clarity. Understand that you're not dealing with someone who operates by the same emotional logic or values as you. You're dealing with a structure built entirely to avoid self-awareness and accountability. Any attempt to reason with them using normal emotional frameworks will likely fail, not because your points are invalid, but because they cannot afford to internalize them without risking a collapse of their identity. What they fear most is not you walking away in anger, it's you walking away in clarity, with understanding, with peace. Because it shows them they never had control, that you've seen behind the mask, that you've dismantled the illusion, and perhaps most painfully for them, that you're now out of reach. This psychological insight is the first step. Once you understand how the narcissist operates, not just what they do, but why, you begin to reclaim power. You stop playing their game. You stop feeding their narrative. And in doing so, you begin the process of not only healing yourself, but dismantling the very structure that gave them power over you to begin with. When confronted with the damage a narcissist has caused, the natural instinct is to retaliate. You want them to feel what you felt: the confusion, the betrayal, the emotional isolation. You want to confront them, to expose them, to pour out your pain so they might finally acknowledge the devastation they left behind. But this approach, though human, is tragically ineffective when dealing with narcissistic psychology. The reality is that direct revenge, emotional appeals, or attempts to make them see what they've done rarely produce the resolution or justice one might expect. In fact, these efforts often do the opposite. They feed the very dynamic that enabled the abuse in the first place. A narcissist thrives on emotional reaction. Positive or negative, your emotional energy becomes their fuel. To a narcissist, emotional chaos equals control. If they can keep you angry, pleading, confused, or devastated, then they know they still occupy space in your psyche. They may not like your pain on the surface, but they draw significance from it. It confirms their impact. It verifies their importance. They don't care whether the reflection in your mirror is admiration or hatred, as long as it's focused on them. They feel powerful. This is the trap. You attempt to reach them with emotion, thinking they'll finally break down and understand, but what you're actually doing is reinforcing their sense of control. This is why direct retaliation insults, shouting matches, emotionally charged confrontations so often backfire. A narcissist doesn't internalize shame the way a healthy individual might. In fact, they don't metabolize personal responsibility at all. When you accuse them of harm, they don't reflect inward, they deflect outward. They rewrite the story in real time. Suddenly, you're the aggressor, you're the problem, you're the unstable one. They will twist your narrative with frightening speed and conviction. What you meant as a cry for justice becomes their justification to paint you as vindictive, ungrateful, or crazy. It's not that they don't hear you, it's that they can't afford to hear you. Accepting the truth about their behavior would require them to acknowledge the falseness of their entire self-image. That would mean confronting their own emptiness, their own unresolved trauma, and the years they've spent avoiding it through manipulation, control, and ego inflation. And that's something they are structurally unable to do. They are not designed to process criticism, not even gentle, honest feedback, because their identity is built like a house of cards. A single moment of genuine introspection could cause the entire system to collapse. Appealing to empathy doesn't work either. Narcissists don't lack emotion, they lack the capacity to prioritize your emotion over their self-interest. If they display guilt or sadness, it's often performative, a way to maintain control, not an indication of genuine remorse. They may mimic emotional understanding, especially when they fear losing their grip on you, but as soon as they feel secure again, that performance fades. The remorse disappears, the cycle resets. So what's the alternative? It's not silence rooted in fear, it's silence rooted in strategy. It's not revenge driven by rage, it's removal grounded in self-respect. The most disarming response to a narcissist is not an outburst but indifference. Not begging them to change but refusing to engage. Not trying to make them see your pain but choosing not to show it where it can be used against you. And here's the paradox that burns the narcissist the most: when they no longer matter to you. Not because you hate them, not because you need to prove anything, but because you've truly stepped out of their psychological sphere. They are no longer the center of your emotional landscape. This absence of attention, this lack of emotional resonance is what unsettles them. To a narcissist, irrelevance is annihilation. They can't control what they can't reach. And when they sense they no longer have emotional power over you, the illusion of their superiority cracks. You don't teach a narcissist a lesson by screaming at them. You teach them by evolving beyond them. You don't restore justice by becoming like them. You restore it by becoming whole, by reclaiming the emotional autonomy they tried to erase. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop seeking acknowledgement from someone incapable of giving it, that's when the balance of power shifts. It may not look like justice from the outside, but make no mistake, for a narcissist, being denied emotional influence, being treated with calm neutrality, and seeing you thrive, without them that is a punishment they can't explain or escape. The concept of narcissistic supply is central to understanding how narcissists function, and more importantly, how to truly impact them without stooping to their level. Narcissistic supply is the emotional nourishment they extract from others to uphold their false sense of self-attention, admiration, validation, even fear or outrage. It doesn't have to be positive. In fact, they often provoke conflict or confusion precisely because it guarantees an emotional response. It reminds them they still have control, that they are still the central figure in your world. To remove that supply is to remove the fuel that powers their entire identity. The narcissist's inner world is barren and emotional desert, sustained only by the emotional energy of others. Without that external affirmation or attention, they begin to unravel. It's not simply that they dislike being ignored, it's that they experience it as a psychological collapse. When you no longer react to their provocation, when your eyes no longer light up with rage or despair in their presence, they no longer have access to the emotional currency they depend on. And that, to them, is existentially threatening. One of the most effective and educational strategies for causing a narcissist to feel the weight of their actions is to starve them of this supply. That doesn't mean being passive or submissive, it means being strategically indifferent. It's the choice to not give them what they crave most, your energy, your attention, your emotional vulnerability. When you withdraw this, you're not just walking away, you're dismantling the entire dynamic they once had control over. This begins with boundaries, clear, firm, and unemotional. The narcissist is accustomed to pushing, testing, and crossing limits. They exploit hesitation and thrive in emotional gray areas. But when you begin to enforce boundaries without justifying, arguing, or defending, you send a message they can't easily manipulate, that they no longer hold power over your internal state. And that kind of message speaks louder than any accusation ever could. Silence in this context is not weakness, it's mastery. When you stop explaining yourself, stop trying to win arguments, stop reacting to bait, the narcissist is left facing a vacuum. That vacuum is terrifying to them. They will likely escalate, attempting everything from guilt-tripping to rage, from false apologies to smear campaigns. These reactions are not signs of strength, they're signs of panic. They're attempts to force you back into the familiar role of provider of supply. But if you remain grounded, they begin to realize something deeply unsettling. Their influence is gone. You've become emotionally self-contained and therefore useless to their narrative. This doesn't just bruise their ego, it disrupts their entire internal architecture. Because if someone they once controlled can escape their influence, what does that say about the omnipotent self-image they've worked so hard to maintain? The withdrawal of narcissistic supply also includes emotional unpredictability. Narcissists count on your patterns. If you always defend yourself when criticized, they know how to bait you. If you always seek closure after conflict, they know how to string you along. But when your reactions shift, when you begin to respond with calm detachment or simply no response at all, you become unreadable to them. That unreadability is power. It forces them to confront their lack of control, which is their deepest fear. Another critical point is the rebuilding of your attention. Narcissists hate when their former targets begin to focus on themselves, their goals, their healing, their joy. Because it shows that life moves on without them. That they were not the axis around which your world revolved. Redirecting your energy away from the narcissist and toward your own development is the final form of supply deprivation. It shows them without a word that you are no longer available for manipulation, emotional labor, or projection. This is not about playing games. This is about psychological reality. Narcissists are not healed by confrontation. They are not transformed by empathy. They are destabilized by irrelevance. They are weakened when the narrative they've crafted no longer works, and the audience they once depended on has stopped clapping. You don't need to inflict pain to make them feel it. All you need to do is remove yourself as the source of it. And in doing so, you reveal the fragility behind their facade. The most powerful form of response to narcissistic abuse is not retaliation, exposure, or even confrontation. It is transformation. And that transformation starts with the rebuilding of yourself. In a relationship with a narcissist, the core wound often isn't just the pain they caused, but the part of yourself you lost while trying to survive them. It's the shrinking of your voice, the erosion of your confidence, the quiet surrender of your boundaries, your identity, and sometimes your very sense of reality. Reclaiming those pieces is not only the foundation of healing, it is the ultimate act of defiance. Narcissists do not expect their victims to rise, they expect them to stay broken. Narcissists are masterful at convincing you that your worth is conditional, tied to how well you serve them, admire them, or conform to their version of who you should be. Slowly, often without you even realizing, you begin to diminish yourself. You silence your needs, doubt your instincts, second-guess your choices. You become reactive rather than proactive, always trying to manage their moods, their accusations, their shifting standards. Over time, the relationship stops being a partnership and becomes a performance, one where your role is to keep the peace, take the blame, and minimize the damage. This is why your healing is not just about recovery, it's about reconstruction. Rebuilding your sense of self means learning, perhaps for the first time, what it feels like to prioritize your inner world. What do you want? What do you value? What do you need not to be liked or approved of, but to feel real, grounded, and whole again? These questions are not optional. They are the starting points of your liberation. Because the moment you begin to anchor yourself in your own truth, the narcissist's influence begins to fade. They don't expect that. They expect silence or fear or desperate attempts to win them back. But when you begin to rise quietly, steadily, unapologetically, something inside them panics. They can feel it. They can sense that the control is slipping. They see that the old tactics aren't working. And perhaps worst of all for them, they see you becoming something they never intended, self-sufficient. Narcissists thrive in imbalance. They need the emotional scales to be tipped in their favor, you down them up. You confuse them clear, you insecure them superior, but when you level the scale, when you reclaim your confidence, your voice, your goals, you strip them of the leverage they once had. And here's the deeper truth. Narcissists aren't just threatened by confrontation. They're threatened by your joy, your peace, your independence. Because those are all signs that their influence was not permanent, that the damage they caused did not define you. You don't even need to tell them. You don't need to announce your growth. In fact, the most profound changes are the ones that don't require explanation. They'll feel it when their words no longer pierce you. They'll notice it when you stop explaining your boundaries and simply enforce them. They'll see it when your energy shifts, no longer defensive or anxious, but calm, firm, and self-directed. This rebuilding process often involves rediscovering things that were once yours before the relationship. Hobbies you abandoned, friends you distanced, passions you suppressed. You begin to reconnect with yourself in a way that is deeply stabilizing. Therapy, journaling, reading, physical health, creative expression, these are not just self-care practices, they are acts of resistance. Each step you take back toward yourself is a step away from the narrative they tried to trap you in. And when you do this long enough, something powerful happens. The narcissist becomes smaller in your mind, not because you're ignoring the harm they caused, but because you're no longer living inside it. You've expanded beyond the space they occupied. They're no longer the center of your story you are. That shift may not give you the apology you deserve. It won't make them understand or change. But it does something far more important. It frees you. And that freedom, that wholeness, that silent, rising strength, that is what shakes a narcissist to their core. Because they don't know how to dominate someone who no longer needs their approval. They don't know how to control someone who is rooted in their own worth. And they don't know how to destroy someone who has already rebuilt themselves. One of the most common and dangerous mistakes people make when dealing with a narcissist is assuming that exposure, emotional outbursts, dramatic confrontations, or reactive accusations will lead to justice, understanding, or remorse. It won't. In fact, to a narcissist, this kind of reactive energy is an opportunity, not a threat. They twist it, weaponize it, and use it to reinforce the narrative that you are unstable, unreasonable, or even abusive. This is why the key to dismantling a narcissist's power lies not in chaos, but in composure. Calm, calculated exposure in the right time, with the right tools, is what truly destabilizes their carefully constructed image. Narcissists survive on illusion. They spend their lives manufacturing a persona that appears admirable, competent, charming, and confident. To the outside world, they often seem articulate, persuasive, and successful. But what most people don't see is that this persona is a performance-fragile script and designed to conceal a deep fear of inadequacy. Maintaining that image is everything to them. It's not just about vanity, it's about survival. So when that image is threatened by truth, especially truth delivered with clarity and evidence, the narcissist begins to fracture. But this is where strategy matters. If you attempt to expose them in a heated, emotional way, shouting, accusing, or threatening, you lose your advantage. Not only does it give them ammunition to label you as irrational or overly sensitive, it allows them to shift the focus away from their behavior and onto your reaction. They don't respond to intensity with introspection, they respond with denial, deflection, or counterattack. They will cry victim, twist facts, and enlist allies to support their version of events. In doing so, they not only avoid accountability, but also reinforce their control over the narrative. However, when you approach the truth with calmness, precision, and control, the dynamic shifts. Narcissists are not equipped to handle people who remain emotionally unaffected by their provocations. When you speak the truth with composure without yelling, pleading, or justifying, they're left with fewer tools. They can't gaslight your tone, they can't provoke you into reacting, and they can't easily manipulate others into taking their side because you've presented your case with logic and restraint. Think of composure as a mirror, not a weapon. You don't attack the narcissist with rage. You hold up a mirror so they can see their own behavior reflected clearly. This reflection is deeply unsettling to them. They've spent their entire lives avoiding it. They rely on others to protect them from the consequences of their actions. But when someone refuses to be drawn into emotional games and instead calmly states facts, sets boundaries, or walks away without drama, the narcissist is confronted with something they cannot control, truth delivered without fear. This doesn't mean you should expose them publicly at every opportunity. That too can backfire if done carelessly. Timing and setting matter. If you need to confront a narcissist in a professional or legal setting, documentation, consistency, and witness credibility are crucial. In personal relationships, Sometimes the most effective exposure is not verbal at all, it's behavioral. It's your refusal to engage in their games. It's living your life with dignity and integrity while they spiral in confusion over why you're no longer reacting. The other element of calm exposure is the silent message it sends to those watching. Narcissists often control group dynamics by playing different roles for different people, charming to some, cruel to others. When you maintain composure and speak truth in a balanced way, others begin to see the cracks in the narcissist's mask. You don't have to convince them. You just have to embody the contrast. Over time, truth has a gravity to it. And while the narcissist scrambles to protect their image, those who observe both sides will begin to question what's real. This is why truth delivered calmly is not just a response, it's a disruption. It destabilizes the narcissist's illusion of invincibility. It forces them to either reflect or retreat. And while many will retreat into denial or projection, the fact remains that their mask has slipped. Even if they never admit it, even if they try to rebuild the image elsewhere, a seed of doubt has been planted in them and in those around them. So if your goal is to make a narcissist feel the consequences of their actions, don't explode, expose, and do it not with rage, but with reason, not with desperation, but with discipline. Because the one thing a narcissist cannot mimic or manipulate is someone who knows the truth, lives the truth, and refuses to be moved by anything less. The deepest wound a narcissist can suffer is not hatred, not confrontation, not even exposure. It is being forgotten. It is being moved on from. It is the quiet, final absence of your attention. Because at their core, narcissists are not built to handle being irrelevant. They derive their sense of identity from how others react to them. Your emotional presence, whether it came in the form of admiration, love, fear, or pain, was their oxygen. So when you detach fully and completely, not in appearance but in truth, you strike at the very foundation of their existence. And they feel that more than any words you could ever say. Narcissists want you to stay emotionally entangled, even if it's through hate. They'll provoke you with silence, with lies, with triangulation, with random gestures of affection meant to reignite confusion. They don't necessarily want you happy, and they don't want you gone. What they want is access to your time, your mind, your inner world. Because as long as they have that, they remain relevant. And to the narcissist, relevance is power. This is why the most profound consequence you can deliver is emotional disengagement. Not the performative kind, not pretending to move on while still obsessing behind the scenes, but the authentic kind. The kind where you no longer check their social media. The kind where their name no longer elicits a visceral reaction. The kind where their voice doesn't echo in your decisions. This kind of detachment is the final form of healing. It doesn't mean you deny the pain or forget the past. It means the past no longer dictates your present. From the narcissist's perspective, this is terrifying. They need to believe that they left a permanent mark, that no matter where you go or who you become, a part of you will always belong to them. So when you break that illusion, when you build a life that is not a reaction to their harm, but an expression of your freedom, they begin to crumble internally. Not always visibly, not always immediately, but silently beneath the surface they feel it. Because for the first time, they're outside the story. And not as the villain, as nothing. The narcissist may try to regain control through hovering, resurfacing after weeks, months, or even years, often with vague messages, apologies, or sudden acts of remorse. But these are not signs of growth. They're signs of withdrawal symptoms. They're not reaching out because they've changed. They're reaching out because they feel your absence and can't tolerate the void it leaves behind. Do not mistake this for love. It is addiction, and you are the supply. The beauty of true detachment is that you no longer feel compelled to respond. You don't need to block them out of anger or answer them out of politeness. You simply move differently now. Your peace is not performative, it's internal. Your silence is not the absence of words, it's the presence of self-respect. You're not fighting the narcissist anymore because they're no longer in the ring with you. You're playing a different game, entirely one rooted in growth, clarity, and self-direction. This kind of healing forces the narcissist to face a reality they've avoided their entire lives, that people can walk away and never look back, that their charm isn't enough to keep someone tethered forever. That manipulation doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that the damage they cause doesn't define the future of the person they tried to break. You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them. And nothing disarms a narcissist more than irrelevance. So don't underestimate the power of your peace. It is not passive, it is a force. When you stop speaking their language, the language of chaos, drama, and emotional baiting, they lose their voice. When you stop reacting, they lose their script. When you stop needing anything from them, they lose their purpose in your story. And that loss is not something they can explain away. This is why moving on is not just a step toward healing, it is the final quiet revolution. You don't need to make them feel your pain to get closure. You just need to show them by your very life that they no longer have the power to shape it. And when you live well, fully, freely, not in spite of them, but completely apart from them, you deliver the one message they were never prepared to receive. You were never the source of my worth. And now that I know that you no longer exist in the pages of my life that matter,